A door that has been sealed for 3 years does not simply open. It resists. The wood swells against the frame. The old iron lock forgets the shape of any key but its own, and the wax that the crown's officers pressed over the seam hardens into a small, brittle crust that has to be broken before the thing will move at all. I knew all of this because I had stood outside that door every third night for the better part of 2 winters, and in all that time nobody had asked it to open, and it never had. So when I heard it give that low, splintering complaint of a frame being pried, coming out of the dark at the far end of the west terrace at some hour past 2 in the morning, I did not need to think about what it meant. I knew the sound the way you know a wrong note in a song you have heard 1,000 times. Someone was inside the late Queen's house. My name is Edrin Vale. At the time I held the rank of corporal in the household guard of the Kingdom of Eldermoor, and my post that season was the quietest and least wanted in the whole rotation. The night watch over Wren Cottage, the private home that had belonged to the late Queen Isolde before her death, and that had been sealed by order of the Crown on the day of her funeral and left sealed ever since. It was not a cottage in any humble sense. It was a long, low stone house set apart from the main palace by a walled garden and a lane of old limes, with its own gate, its own well, its own small chapel, and windows that had not shown a candle in 3 years. Isolde had loved it. She had kept it as her own, apart from the ceremony of the court, and when she died the king had ordered it closed exactly as she left it, and had not been able to bring himself to enter it since. Guarding a house that no one enters is the sort of duty men grumble about. There is nothing to do. There is no one to salute, no gate to march, no crowd to hold back. You stand in the cold and you watch a dark house not change. Younger men found it an insult. I did not. I had come to feel that I was guarding something more than an empty building, that a house kept exactly as a good woman left it is a kind of promise, and that a promise deserves a sentry as much as a treasury does. So I watched it well. I knew every shutter and every loose slate. I knew that the third lime from the gate dropped a branch in a hard wind. I knew the house was empty. And now it was not. I did not shout. I did not run. The first rule they teach you, before they teach you anything about honor or the king, is that a guard who panics is a guard who is already beaten. I moved along the terrace with my back to the wall out of the moonlight and I listened. The prying had stopped. That meant the door was open. There was a thin, wavering light moving behind the shuttered windows of the front room, not a lantern, something smaller and colder, the blue-white glow of one of those handheld electric torches. It swung and steadied and swung again, the way a light moves when someone is looking for something they have not found. A thief, I thought first, and my hand went to the whistle at my collar that would bring the gate watch running. But I stopped myself before I blew it, and I have thought about that hesitation many times since, because everything that followed turned on it. A common thief does not come to a house that has been publicly sealed by the crown, a house every soul in the realm knows is watched. A common thief robs a house that is easy. Whoever was inside Wren Cottage had come knowing it was guarded, knowing it was forbidden, and had come anyway. That is not greed. That is need. And a person who needs something badly enough to break a royal seal is not looking for silver. They are looking for something that matters. So I did not blow the whistle. I went to the door. It stood open a hand's width, the wax seal cracked and hanging, the officer's ribbon torn. A small iron pry bar had been left leaning against the jamb, and beside it, folded neatly on the step as if the intruder had not wanted to soil them, was a pair of pale kid gloves. That detail stopped me cold. A thief does not fold his gloves. A thief does not own kid gloves. I looked at those gloves for a long moment, and a cold certainty began to gather in me, the kind you do not want to be right about. I stepped inside. The front room of the cottage opened out before me, and even in the dark and the swinging torchlight I could see that it had been kept the way I had been told it was kept, everything in its place, everything under a fine gray skin of 3 years' dust. A chair by the cold hearth with a shawl still over its arm, a low table with a book left open, its pages long since curled. A tall clock stopped. The air was close and dry and smelled of dust and old lavender, the smell of a room that has held its breath for a long time. And across that room, her back to me, bent over the drawers of a writing desk with a torch clamped in one hand, and the other rifling through papers she was pulling out and dropping to the floor, was a woman in a dark traveling cloak. I knew her before she turned. I knew the set of those shoulders, the particular impatience of those hands, the voice, because she was muttering to herself, low and furious, that had given orders in the palace corridors for years and expected them obeyed before they were finished. It was the Queen Consort. It was Morwenna, the king's second wife, the woman who had married Alaric 2 years after Isolde's death and who wore now the crown that Isolde had once worn. "It is not here," she was saying to herself, yanking a drawer clean out of the desk and turning it over so its contents spilled. "It is not here, it is not here. Where did you? Your Majesty." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. In that dead, sealed, silent room even a level word landed like a dropped stone. She spun so fast the torch beam swung across the ceiling and blinded me for a heartbeat, and then it steadied on my face, and I saw her recognize the red of my tunic, the shape of my helmet, and I watched the fury on her face fight with fear and then master it, because Morwenna was never afraid for long. She drew herself up. Even in a torn cloak in a room she had broken into like a burglar, she drew herself up as though I were the one who had trespassed. "Corporal," she said, her voice had gone smooth as poured oil. "You startled me. Thank goodness it is only you. I could not sleep. I came for a walk in the garden and I found the door of this poor house standing open, broken into. I feared thieves. I came inside to see whether anything had been taken and—" "The door was sealed, Your Majesty," I said. "It is sealed still on every record of the crown. There was no open door until one was made." Her eyes narrowed a fraction. She was recalculating. I have since learned that this is the most dangerous thing about a certain kind of powerful person. They do not stop when they are caught. They simply choose a new lie and commit to it with the same total confidence they gave the old one. "You forget yourself," she said, and now the smoothness had an edge in it. "I am the Queen Consort of this realm. There is no door in Eldermoor I may not pass. This house belonged to a queen, and I am the queen who came after her. If I choose to enter it, that is my right, and no corporal of the watch will lecture me about seals." She turned her back on me, that was meant to end it, and bent again to the desk. "Now, you will hold that light for me and say nothing of this to anyone, and in the morning you will find yourself promoted, or you will make trouble and find yourself posted to the fens. Choose." It was very quiet in that room. Behind me, the broken seal hung from the door. In front of me, the crown of Eldermoor, in the person of the woman who wore it, was on her knees pulling a dead queen's papers onto the floor and offering me my future if I would help her do it. "I cannot hold the light, Your Majesty," I said. She did not look up. "You cannot," she repeated, as if she had not heard a word so absurd in years. "No, this house is under seal by direct order of His Majesty the King, not by the order of the officers, not by the order of the household, by the King's own hand. I have read the order. Every man on this post has read it. It says the house is to remain closed and undisturbed, and that any person found within it of whatever rank is to be detained and the matter brought before the King himself. Of whatever rank, Your Majesty. There is no name written that is exempt. Not yours, not mine, not the King's own, for he set his own hand outside it too." I took a slow breath. "So I cannot hold your light, and I cannot say nothing, and I cannot let you carry anything out of this room. I am sorry. Those are not things within my choosing." Now she looked up, and I saw, for one bare instant before she hid it, the thing I had come to be certain of on the step outside when I saw the folded gloves. It was not the look of a woman caught in a small impropriety. It was the look of a gambler who has staked everything on a single card and has just seen a man's hand move toward the deck. It was fear, real, cold, particular fear. She was not afraid of scandal. She was afraid of what was in this house. and she had come at 2 in the morning, alone, with a pry bar and folded gloves, to make sure I never saw it. That was the moment I stopped thinking of this as a break-in and started thinking of it as something I had been standing guard over for 2 years without knowing it. "You have no idea," she said softly, and the smoothness was gone now, all of it. "What you are doing, boy. You have no idea what you are standing in front of." "Then tell me," I said. She laughed one short, ugly sound with nothing of humor in it. "Tell you, so that a corporal of the night watch can carry it to no. No." She stood, brushing the dust from her cloak with quick, furious strokes, and I saw her decide to leave, to cut her losses, to walk out past me as though rank alone would make me part before her. She had one thing still gripped in her left hand, half hidden in the folds of the cloak, a bundle of papers she had not dropped with the others. She had found something after all, or she had brought something. Either way, she meant it to leave the house in her hand. "Whatever is in your hand, your majesty," I said, and I moved not to touch her. I would sooner have cut off my own arm than lay a hand on the Queen Consort, but to stand between her and the door stays in this house until the king has seen it. That is the order. If it is yours, the king will return it to you and you will lose nothing. If it is Queen Isolde's, it was never yours to take. Set it on the table." "You would raise your hand to your queen," she breathed. "I have not raised my hand. I will not. But I will not stand aside either." I kept my voice level and low, because I had learned long ago that the quieter you are in such a moment, the louder the other person's own anger sounds in their own ears. "You may walk out of that door whenever you please, your majesty. I will not stop your person, but nothing leaves this room in your hand. Set it down and go, and this need go no further tonight than a report I am bound to write. Carry it out, and I will blow this whistle, and the whole gate watch will be standing in that garden inside 2 minutes, and there will be no report that stays quiet then. That is the whole of the choice. It is not mine to soften, and it is not yours to change." For a long moment she stood there, the torchlight trembling very slightly in her hand, and I watched her measure whether I was bluffing, whether I could be bought after all, whether she could sweep past and dare me to touch her. And I let her see without a word that she could not, that I was not calculating, that there was nothing in me for her to bargain with because I did not want anything she had to offer. It is a strange power, wanting nothing. The powerful do not know what to do with a man who wants nothing from them. Every lever they are used to pulling comes up in their hand attached to nothing. Slowly, her jaw tight, Morwenna set the bundle of papers on the low table beside the curled-open book. "You will regret this," she said, "for the rest of your very short career." "Perhaps," I said. "Go home, your majesty. It is late and cold, and this is not a good place to be found." She pulled her cloak around her and swept past me to the door, and paused on the broken threshold, and turned back once. In the light of the moon that fell across the step I could see her face clearly for the first time, and there was no fury left in it. There was only that fear, gone very cold and very still. "You think you have done a fine, honest thing tonight," she said. "You have opened a grave, corporal, and you will not like what climbs out of it." Then she was gone into the dark of the garden, and I stood alone in a dead queen's front room with a broken seal behind me, a bundle of papers on the table in front of me, and the slow dawning knowledge that whatever I had been guarding for 2 years, I had never once understood what it was. I did not touch the papers. I want that written down plainly, because it mattered a great deal later, and because it was the hardest thing I did that night. Every instinct in me wanted to open that bundle and know what a queen had crossed a garden at 2 in the morning to steal. But I had told her that nothing would move in that room until the king had seen it, and a man who breaks his own word the moment the other party's back is turned is not a guardian. He is only a thief with better manners. So I stood, and I did not touch them, and I made myself a witness instead of a party. I noted where they lay. I noted the drawer she had turned out and the papers scattered on the floor and the pry bar and the folded gloves on the step. I fixed the whole of that room in my memory, the way you fix a face you will have to describe. Then I went to the door, and I blew the whistle after all, one long note and two short. The call that means come, but come quietly, no alarm. The man who answered it was Sergeant Havard, the watch commander, a square, gray, unhurried man who had been a guardsman longer than I had been alive, and who had, I think, seen everything a palace can do to a person and been surprised by exactly none of it. He came through the garden gate with his lantern low, and his face already set to trouble, because a quiet call in the dead middle of the night from the one post where nothing ever happens is its own kind of alarm. He stopped when he saw the broken door. He looked at the prybar. He looked at the folded gloves. He looked at me. "Tell me," he said. I told him. I told him all of it plainly, in the order it happened, and I named her, because there is no honesty in a report that leaves out the name that makes it dangerous. Havard listened without a word, his face giving nothing back, and when I had finished, he was silent for a long time, looking through the broken door into the dark front room where the bundle of papers lay pale on the table. "You let her walk out," he said at last. It was not quite an accusation. He was checking the shape of it. "I let her person walk out. She is the Queen Consort. I will not lay hands on her, and I will not lock her in a room, and neither would you have, but nothing left in her hand. What she came for is on that table, exactly where she set it down, and I have not touched it, and neither will you, and neither will any man on this watch. That is for the king." Havard let out a slow breath through his nose. "You understand what you have done, corporal?" "I have kept a seal that the king set with his own hand," I said. "That is all I understand that I have done. The rest of it I do not understand at all, and I would very much like to." "No," said Havard. "You have done more than keep a seal. You have caught the Queen Consort of Eldermoor breaking into a dead queen's house in the middle of the night to carry something away, and you have left it lying on a table for the king to find. Do you know what a woman like that will do to a man who has done that to her?" He shook his head slowly. "She will not come at you with an army. She will come at you with a whisper. By noon there will be a story that you were the one who broke the seal, that you were seen taking things out, that she came upon you and stopped you, her word, corporal, a queen's word, against a corporal of the night watch. That is the war you have started, and you did not start it because you are clever. You started it because you are honest, which is worse, because honest men never see the knife coming. I had thought of none of this, I confess it. I had thought only of the order, and the seal, and the bundle in her hand, and the simple fact that it was not hers to carry off. Havard was right. Standing in that cold garden, I felt for the first time the size of the thing I had walked into, and it was much larger than one broken door. "Then we do not let it become her word against mine," I said slowly, feeling my way. "We make it a matter of record before she can make it a matter of whisper. We report it up tonight in writing to someone whose word outweighs hers before she is even home. We do not accuse her. We simply set down exactly what happened, sign it, seal it, and put it into a hand she cannot reach into. Then whatever she whispers, there will already be a truth on paper that came first." Havard looked at me for a long moment, and something in his hard gray face shifted, not softened, exactly, but settled, the way a man settles when he has decided to stand with you instead of merely watch you fall. "There is one hand in this palace her whisper cannot reach into," he said. "And it is not the king's. She sleeps next to the king, and she has had 2 years to teach him what to hear. It is his sister, Princess Adela." I knew the name, as every man in the guard knew it. Princess Adela was the king's elder sister, a woman of some 60 years who had never married, who ran the great charities and the ceremonial calendar of the crown with an exactness that made grown officials nervous, and who was known throughout the household for exactly 2 things: that she could not be lied to, and that she did not forgive being lied to twice. If the palace had a spine, it was Adela. She had loved Isolde. She had, it was quietly said, never once in 2 years addressed a warm word to Morwenna, and Morwenna, for all her power, had never dared move against the king's own sister. "She will be asleep," I said. "Then we will wake her," said Havard. "This is the sort of thing she would sooner be woken for than not. Veil, write it now. Here, on your knee, in the light of my lantern, before your memory can be talked out of a single detail. Write exactly what you saw and heard and did, name every name, leave nothing to soften it and nothing to sharpen it. Then we will both sign it, and we will leave a man on this door who will not so much as breathe on that table, and you and I will carry this to the Princess Adela before the Queen Consort has her boots off. So that is what I did. I wrote it kneeling on the cold stone of the terrace, by the yellow light of a sergeant's lantern, with the broken door beside me and the dead Queen's house at my back, and I set down every word of it plainly, the sound of the frame giving the blue-white torch, the drawers pulled out, the folded gloves, the bundle in her hand, the whole of what she said and what I said, the promotion offered and the fens threatened, the papers set down on the table and not taken. I did not know then that the account I wrote kneeling in the dark that night would be read aloud, months later, in a room full of the highest people in the realm, and that whole lives would turn on whether it was true. I only knew that Havard was right, that a truth set down early is a fortress, and that I had better build mine well. We left young Perrin on the door, a serious boy who would have stood between that table and a charging horse, and Havard and I crossed the sleeping palace to the wing where the king's family kept their private rooms. The great galleries were dark and cold, and hung with the portraits of dead Harrowgate kings, and our boots on the stone were the only sound in the world. I remember thinking that a palace at night is the loneliest place a man can be, all that guilt and history and no living soul, and that somewhere in it the Queen Consort was lying awake, and thinking, and beginning already to build the whisper that would answer my report. Princess Adela's door was guarded by her own woman, who took one look at Havard's face and did not argue, and Adela, when she came out to us wrapped in a plain dark robe with her gray hair down and her eyes perfectly clear. She was one of those people who wake all at once, entire, with no muddle in them. Adela listened to my report read out in Havard's flat sergeant's voice, standing very still in the light of a single lamp, and when it was done she did not gasp and she did not exclaim. She was quiet for the length of 3 long breaths. Then she said, in a low, even voice that I have never forgotten, "So she has finally gone to look for it herself. She must be very frightened indeed." And then, more to herself than to us, "Isolde, oh my dear, you hid it well, but you should have told me where." "Ma'am," I said before I could stop myself, "you know what she came for." Adela turned those clear gray eyes on me, and studied me for a moment as though deciding how much a corporal could be trusted to carry. "I know that my brother's first wife did not die the ordinary death the court was told she died," she said quietly. "I know that in the last months of her life Isolde was afraid and would not say of what, and that she began keeping papers she would not show me, and that she made me promise, if anything happened to her, to see her private house sealed and left exactly as it was sealed, corporal, not searched, sealed and left. I gave her that promise. I made my brother give it too. Neither of us ever knew why." She looked past us, toward the dark window and the garden beyond it where Wren Cottage stood under the moon. "For 3 years I have wondered what was in that house that a dying woman wanted kept whole and untouched, and tonight the Queen Consort broke a royal seal at 2 in the morning to take something out of it before anyone else could find it." Her mouth set into a thin, hard line. "I think, corporal, that you and I are about to learn what my sister-in-law was so afraid of. And I think we had better learn it before Morwenna decides that the man who caught her is more dangerous alive than dead to her reputation." Adela moved fast then, in a way that told me she had spent a lifetime moving fast in a slow, formal place, and knew exactly which corners could be cut. She did not send for the king, not yet. She said, and I understood her, that a man woken in the dark and told his wife was a burglar would either refuse to believe it or believe it too much, and both were dangerous before there was proof. Instead she dressed, and she summoned 2 people, the old keeper of the household records, a dry stick of a man named Master Oren who could tell you which king had signed which order in which year without opening a book, and the family's own physician of long standing, Dr. Wren, who had attended Isolde in her last illness and who, Adela said with a look I did not then understand, may have things to answer for or things to add. And she told Havard to change nothing and guard everything, and she told me to come with her because, she said, you are the only living soul who has seen the inside of that house since it was sealed, and I want the man who kept the seal standing beside me when it is broken lawfully at last. We waited until first light. Adela was insistent on that. Whatever was done, she said, would be done in daylight before witnesses, with the records keeper present and the whole thing written down as it was found, so that no one, not Morwenna and not anyone else, could ever say afterward that the truth of that house had been arranged in the dark. It was the same instinct that had made me refuse to touch the papers, raised to the level of a lifetime's craft, and I understood then how the king's sister had held her ground in that palace for 40 years. She did not fight whispers with whispers. She fought them with daylight and witnesses and the plain, boring, unbreakable weight of a record honestly kept. And the whisper came, exactly as Havard had said it would. It came even before dawn. A footman found me on the terrace a little before 6 with a folded note, and the note was from the office of the Queen Consort, and it was addressed not to me but to the watch commander, and it regretted to inform the household guard that during the night the Queen Consort, unable to sleep, had walked in the gardens and had discovered the seal of Wren Cottage broken, and the door forced, that she feared a member of the watch had betrayed his post and entered the late Queen's house for the purpose of theft, and that she required an immediate inquiry into the conduct of the night guard, with the corporal on that post. I was named, suspended from duty pending investigation. It was, I will say for her, beautifully done. It turned everything around. In her telling I was the burglar, she the horrified discoverer, and the inquiry she demanded into me would give her people the run of that house in the name of investigating my crime, which is to say, it would give her a lawful reason to finish, in daylight, exactly what I had stopped her doing in the dark. Havard read it and went gray and said nothing, and handed it to Adela, and Adela read it and did something I had not expected. She smiled. It was not a warm smile. She wrote this before dawn, said Adela, which means she wrote it before she could possibly know whether the corporal had reported anything at all. She has moved first to make him the thief, exactly as if she already knew he was honest and would report her. She folded the note with 2 precise fingers. A guilty person accuses fastest, corporal. Remember that all your life. The innocent are slow to believe they have been wronged. The guilty know it before it happens because they planned it. This note is not evidence against you. It is evidence against her, and she has helpfully dated and signed it. She handed it to Master Oren, who had arrived blinking and disapproving in the gray light. Enter this into the record keeper at the hour it was received, alongside the corporal's account from 4 o'clock. Let them stand side by side. Then we will go and open that house. So the seal of Wren Cottage was broken a second time that night, but lawfully, this time in the cold, clean light of a winter morning, by the king's sister, before the keeper of records, the family physician, the watch commander, and me. Adela herself lifted the torn ribbon and the broken wax, and Master Oren noted the door already forced, and by whom it had first been forced, and we went in together, all of us, into the dead queen's front room where the bundle of papers still lay on the low table exactly where Morwenna had set it down and I had left it. Daylight changed the room. In the gray dawn through the unshuttered windows it was not eerie anymore, only sad. A whole life stopped and left, the shawl on the chair, the book on the table, the stopped clock, 3 years of dust lying soft and even over all of it like the first snow over a grave. Adela stood in the doorway a moment, and I saw her hand go to her mouth, just once, and then come down again, because she was not a woman who would weep in front of a corporal and a clerk. She had loved the woman who had lived here. She crossed to the table and looked down at the bundle of papers without touching it. Keeper, she said, doctor, corporal, you are witnesses that these papers lie where the Queen Consort left them, untouched since the corporal's account was written. Master Orin, you will open them, you will read them aloud, and you will enter each into the record as it is read. No one else lays a hand on them. Begin. Master Orin drew on a pair of clean cotton gloves. I remember thinking of the kid gloves folded on the step, and how differently two people can wear gloves in the same house on the same night. And he lifted the bundle, and untied the faded ribbon that held it, and spread the papers on the cleared end of the table. And we all leaned in the gray light, to see what a dying queen had hidden, and a living queen had come in the dark to steal. At first it seemed almost a disappointment. They were letters, mostly private letters, in a fine slanting hand that Adela drew a breath at and said, "Lo, that is Isolde's writing," and among the letters were household accounts, and a few pages of what looked like a diary, and one long document folded 3 times and sealed with a wax that had cracked but held. Master Orin read the letters first, and they were the letters of a frightened woman, careful, guarded, never quite saying the thing they circled. In one, to a sister who lived abroad, Isolde wrote that she had come to understand something about the arrangements of the household that I do not know how to carry alone, and dare not yet write plainly. In another, undated, she wrote, "If I am wrong, I have wronged a good many people and will beg their pardon on my knees. But I do not think I am wrong. I think I am the only one who has troubled to add the numbers, and I think the numbers are why I am so often unwell of late." At that line Adela went very still, and turned slowly to look at Dr. Wren. The physician had gone the color of the dust on the table. "Dr. Wren," said Adela, in a voice that had gone soft and terrible, "in the last months of her life the late queen was often unwell. You attended her. What was she unwell of?" "A weakness of the blood," said Wren faintly. "A wasting. It came and went. I could not name its cause. I have wondered since whether I ought to have." He stopped. His hands were shaking. "Ma'am, I did what I could. She would not always take what I prescribed. Toward the end she stopped trusting the food and the drink and even the medicines. She said I thought it was the fear that comes with the illness itself. She said someone was making her ill. I thought she was wandering. God forgive me, I thought she was wandering." The room was very quiet. Master Orin had stopped reading. Adela stood with her hand flat on Isolde's letters as though she could feel through the paper the pulse of the woman who had written them, 3 years dead, and had left this house sealed and untouched precisely so that someone, someday, would stand exactly where we now stood, and add the numbers she had added. "Read the folded document, keeper," said Adela quietly. "The sealed one. I think we have come to the heart of it." Master Orin broke the cracked wax with a thumbnail and unfolded the long document, and smoothed it flat, and began to read. And his dry, careful voice changed as he read, slowed, grew careful in a different way, because he had been keeper of the household records for 30 years and he understood, faster than any of us, what he was holding. It was a ledger. Not the household's official ledger, that one lived in Master Orin's own strong room, and he said so at once sharply. "This is not the Crown's book, this is a private copy, but a shadow of it, a second set of accounts, kept in Isolde's own slanting hand, in which she had copied out, month by month, over the last 2 years of her life, the true figures of the household's income and expenditure against the figures that had been entered into the official book. And beside each pair of figures she had written the difference, and the differences, month after month, all ran one way and all ran to the same place. The estate of the Crown of Eldermoor was being quietly bled. Not robbed all at once, nothing so crude, but drained, a little each month, through 100 small false entries. Payments to suppliers who did not exist, rents collected and never entered, charities funded on paper whose funds went elsewhere, a great house's worth of money vanishing a coin at a time into the dark, where a single large theft would have been caught but 1,000 small ones would not. And Isolde, who had been raised to accounts, who had kept the books of her own family's estates before ever she was a queen, had noticed. She had started quietly to keep her own copy, to add the numbers as she wrote. And she had followed the false entries patiently month by month, back toward the hand that made them. And on the last page of the ledger, in a hand that had grown noticeably weaker, more trembling than the firm hand of the early pages, she had written a name. Master Oren stopped. He looked up. He looked at Adela, and he did not want to read the name aloud, and Adela looked back at him and said very quietly, "Read it, keeper. That is exactly why we came." "The entries," Master Oren read, "the false entries in every case I have traced, pass through the office of the household steward, and are countersigned before they are entered by the controller of the consort's household." He paused, Lord Cassius. "And the monies, so far as I have been able to follow them, come to rest in accounts held in the name of or for the benefit of the consort herself. I do not want this to be true. I have checked it 11 times. It is true. God help me, it is true, and I do not know whom I dare tell, for she is the queen, and I am only the queen who came before and dying." Lord Cassius, Morwenna's son. The whole shape of it came clear in that cold front room like a picture surfacing in dark water. Isolde had discovered that the consort's household, Morwenna, through her son Cassius, whom she had contrived to have placed as controller, was quietly stealing the crown blind, and had begun to keep the proof, and had begun in the same months to sicken with a wasting no physician could name, and had come to believe at the end that the illness and the theft were the same secret, that she was being made ill because she had begun to add the numbers. And she had been too frightened and too uncertain whom to trust to act on it in her life, so she had done the only thing left to her. She had hidden the proof in her own private house, and made the king's sister promise to seal that house and leave it untouched, knowing, I think, that a sealed house is a locked box, and that a locked box waits, and that someday the box would be opened by someone who would add the numbers as she had, and finish what she had not lived to finish. And Morwenna had known. That was the thing that turned my stomach as I stood there in the gray light. Morwenna had known, for 3 years, that somewhere in that sealed house lay the proof of what she had done, and for 3 years she had not dared to break the seal, because to break it was to be caught, and to be caught near that house was to hang herself. She had waited. She had hoped, perhaps, that the king would order the house cleared, and the papers would be quietly lost. She had, I do not doubt, made more than one careful attempt over the years to have the house opened by some innocent-seeming order, and been blocked each time by Adela's flat refusal to let anyone touch her promise to a dead woman. And at last, after 3 years, some fresh danger, an audit coming, a question asked. I never did learn exactly what lit the fuse had frightened Morwenna so badly that she had done the one thing she had sworn to herself never to do. She had gone herself in the dark, alone, with a pry-bar and folded gloves, to find the ledger and burn it before it could ever be read. And a corporal of the night watch, who wanted nothing she could offer, had been standing on the terrace, and had heard a door that never opened open. She did not come to steal from a dead woman, I said aloud, because I could not help it. She came to destroy the proof that she had killed one. We do not yet know that Isolde was killed, said Adela, but her voice had no conviction in it, and her hand on the ledger was trembling now, and she looked at Dr. Wren, who had sat down heavily in the dead queen's dusty chair with his face in his hands. We know she was robbed. We know she believed she was being poisoned. We know a physician who thought she was wandering. She drew a long breath and stood very straight. That is enough. That is more than enough. Master Oren, you will make a fair copy of every page of this ledger and a second copy, and you will keep the original under your own seal and your own key, and not let it out of the strong room for any order short of the king's own spoken word in front of witnesses. Dr. Wren, you will write down today everything you remember of the late queen's illness, every symptom, every medicine she refused, every word she said that you dismissed as wandering. Every word, doctor. It is late to be honest, but it is not too late, and your soul as well as your queen's memory hangs on it. And she turned to me. And you, corporal, you are about to become the most inconvenient man in Eldermoor. You are the witness, Everything I have just read is paper, and paper can be argued with. But you saw her in that room at that hour with these papers in her hand. You are the living hinge on which the whole of it turns, which is precisely why she has already before dawn tried to make you a thief, and why, when this move fails, she will try something worse. She was right about that too. It was Adela who decided that the king had to be told, and told now, before Morwenna's inquiry against me could gather any force, and told by us and not by his wife. And it was Adela who insisted I come with her to tell him. He will not want to believe it, she said as we crossed the palace toward the king's own rooms, with Master Oren's fresh-inked copy of the ledger in a leather folder under her arm. He is a good man, my brother, and a good man does not want to believe he has slept 2 years beside a thief who poisoned his wife. He will look for a way out. There will be a moment when he wants very badly to believe that this is a conspiracy of his sister and a corporal against the wife he chose. In that moment, corporal, you will say nothing clever and nothing angry. You will simply tell him in plain words exactly what you saw, not what it means. What you saw. Let the seeing carry it. Can you do that? I can only tell the truth, ma'am, I said. I am not clever enough to do anything else. Good, said Adela. That is the only thing in this palace that has ever frightened her. Come. King Alaric received us in his study, and I saw at once what Adela had meant about a good man. He was old and tired and kind-faced, and he loved his sister and trusted her, and he had loved Isolde and mourned her still, and he had married Morwenna in his loneliness 2 years after and had let her fill the empty places, and he did not want. You could see it in the very set of his shoulders as Adela laid the folder on his desk. He did not want any of what was coming to be true. He listened to the ledger read. He listened to the account of the sickness. He grew pale and then flushed and then very quiet, and there was a long, terrible moment, exactly as Adela had promised, when he turned in his chair and looked at me, a corporal of the night watch, standing at attention in his study before dawn, accusing his wife, and I saw the way out rise up in his eyes like a drowning man reaching for a spar. It would be so much easier to believe I was lying, so much kinder to himself. You are telling me, he said slowly, and his voice was not unkind but it was very cold, that my wife broke into my late wife's home in the middle of the night like a common criminal, on your word, a corporal's word. Yes, your majesty, I said. And why should I believe a corporal over the Queen Consort of Eldermoor? And I remembered Adela's counsel, and I did not argue, and I did not defend myself, and I did not say a clever word. I simply told him what I saw. Because at 2 in the morning, your majesty, I heard the door of Wren Cottage open, and it has not opened in 3 years, and I went in, and the Queen Consort was on her knees at the late Queen's writing desk with a torch in her hand, pulling the drawers out and dropping the papers on the floor, and she had a bundle of them gripped in her left hand. And when I told her the house was sealed by your own order, she offered me a promotion to hold the light for her, and the fens if I would not. And when I would not let her carry the papers out, she set them down on the table and she went to the door and she turned and she said to me, these were her words, your majesty, I will remember them till I die, she said, you have opened a grave, corporal, and you will not like what climbs out of it. I let that sit in the cold study for a moment. I did not know then what she meant. I know now. The grave was Queen Isolde's. And what has climbed out of it is a ledger in the late Queen's own hand, that you have just heard read, that says whose hand was in the crown's purse, and why a good woman came to believe she was being made ill for adding up the numbers. I am not clever, your majesty. I cannot argue any of it. I can only tell you that I stood in that room and I saw her, and that everything in that folder was where she left it because I would not let her take it, and that if I am lying, then I am the finest liar in your kingdom and you should hang me for it. But I am not lying. I am only a man who heard a door open that should not have opened and did his duty on the other side of it. The king did not speak for a long time, and then he did the thing that told me he was, after all, the good man his sister believed him to be. He did not send me away. He did not send for Morwenna to soothe him. He put his old hand flat on the leather folder that held his dead wife's ledger, and he closed his eyes, and when he opened them again the drowning man look was gone, and in its place was something harder and older and full of grief. "Adela," he said quietly, "bring me everyone who needs to be in the room, all of it in the open before the whole household as it should have been 3 years ago. If it is true," his voice caught and steadied, "if it is true, then my wife murdered my wife, and I have kept the murderer at my own table for 2 years, and there is not a corner dark enough in this kingdom to hide the shame of it, so we will not try. We will do it in the light. Corporal." He looked at me. "What is your name?" "Vale, your majesty." "Corporal Edrin Vale." "Corporal Vale," said the king. "You heard a door open that should not have opened, and you did your duty on the other side of it. Remember that you did. Whatever they say of you in the days that come, and they will say a great deal, remember that a corporal of my night watch was the only person in this palace who kept faith with a dead queen. Now stand with my sister. This is not finished. It is barely begun." He was right that it was barely begun, and he was right that they would say a great deal of me. But neither he nor I nor even Adela had yet measured how fast and how well Morwenna would fight, cornered for her life. She had not been idle while we opened the house. By the time the king sent for his council, her version of the night was already loose in the palace like smoke under a door, and it was, I must admit, a clever version. In her telling, the corporal on the Wren Cottage post, that was me, had long been in secret contact with certain persons who wished to slander the Queen Consort, that I had myself broken the seal, to plant forged papers in the late Queen's desk, papers I had drawn up to look like Isolde's hand, to blacken a queen I had never met for reasons of my own or my paymaster's, that the ledger was a fabrication made by me, discovered by her when she chanced upon the broken door, and that the king's own sister, who had never loved Morwenna, had seized on the forgery with unseemly haste to strike at a rival. It was, you will notice, our own argument turned exactly inside out. Everything true of her, she said of me. The daylight opening, the witnesses, the keeper's copies, all of it in her telling, was simply the careful staging of a conspiracy that had planned every step. And a good many people in that palace, who owed her their places and feared her reach, found it much safer to believe her than to believe a corporal. The setback, when it came, was worse than a whisper. In the middle of that long gray morning, while the council was being gathered, Lord Cassius, Morwenna's son, the controller whose countersignature ran through every false entry in his dead stepmother's ledger, came to the strong room of the household records with 2 men of the consort's own household guard and a written order, sealed with the consort's seal, demanding that Master Oren surrender to him all documents lately removed from Wren Cottage, being items of the late Queen's private estate, for safekeeping in the office of the consort's household pending the king's decision. It was smooth. It was almost lawful. It rested on the fact that the papers were, technically, the late Queen's private property, and that the consort's household had a colorable claim to administer that estate. If Master Oren had handed over the original ledger, it would have been in the fire before noon, and there would have been nothing left but copies, and copies, Cassius knew, could be called forgeries, exactly as Morwenna was already calling them. Master Oren was a dry old man of 30 years' service and no great physical courage, and I do not blame him for the sweat that stood on his forehead when a great lord and 2 armed men stood in his strong-room doorway with a sealed order. But he did a fine thing. He did not refuse outright. He was too old and too careful to give Cassius the grounds to call it defiance and simply take the papers by force. Instead, he said, in his dry way, that he was bound by the direct order of the king's sister to release the documents to no one short of the king's own spoken word before witnesses, that Lord Cassius was welcome to the copies at once, but that the original stayed sealed in the strong room until the king himself spoke, and that if Lord Cassius wished to lay hands on the king's records against the king's sister's standing order, he was free to do so, but that the keeper would note the hour, and the names of the 2 men, and the exact words of the order in the permanent record before he did, And would Lord Cassius care to have his name written down beside the act of seizing a dead queen's ledger by force the very morning it was found? And Cassius, God be thanked, hesitated. He was his mother's son, and he had her nerve, but he did not have her whole terrible courage, and the thought of his name written in the permanent record beside that act on that morning in front of witnesses checked him for the half a minute that saved everything. Because in that half a minute, Havard arrived. I had sent for him. When I heard, crossing back toward the strong room, that Cassius had gone there with armed men, I did the one thing I could think of that was within a corporal's power. I found the nearest guardsman and sent him running to Sergeant Havard with 4 words: the ledger, the strong room, now, and Havard, who had spent the night deciding to stand with me, came at a dead run with 6 men of the king's own night watch behind him, and arrived in the strong room corridor to find the controller of the consort's household attempting to remove the king's records against the king's sister's order. Havard did not draw a weapon. He did not raise his voice. He simply put 6 men of the household guard in the corridor between Lord Cassius and the strong room door and said, in his flat gray sergeant's voice, "My lord, the king has ordered this house and everything found in it held untouched until he speaks. If you have an order that outranks the king's, I will obey it. If you do not, then you will step away from that door, and I will escort you and your men out with respect, and we will let the king settle whose papers these are. That is the whole of it." It was, in its way, the same stand I had made in the dark of the cottage. The plain, immovable placing of duty between a powerful person and the thing they wanted, with no anger and no bargain in it, and it worked for the same reason mine had. Cassius could bluster, and he did. He could threaten Havard's career, and he did. But he could not make 6 disciplined men of the king's own watch move out of a corridor without an order from the king, and he did not have one, and every minute he stood there arguing was another minute of his name being written into the record beside the attempt. In the end he did what his mother had done in the cottage. He cut his losses. He turned on his heel and he went, but at the door, exactly as his mother had, he turned back, and he looked at me, for by then I had come up behind Havard's men, and he said low, so that only those near could hear, "You are a small man who has stumbled into a large matter. Corporal and large matters have a way of closing over small men without a trace. My mother offered you a promotion. I will offer you this. Walk away now. Say you were mistaken in the dark. Say the light played tricks. Take a wound of conscience and a quiet transfer and live. Because the alternative is that you become the single most important witness in the fall of a queen, and I promise you on everything I hold that no man has ever survived being that. They will find something. They always find something. A debt, a woman, a bribe, a lie in your past. It does not need to be true, corporal. It only needs to be believed. And by the time it is disbelieved, you will be broken and posted to a border fort and forgotten. That is what happens to the small man who becomes the hinge. Walk away." And I will tell you honestly that for one moment it frightened me. Not the threat to my career. I had made my peace with the Fens the moment I refused to hold Morwenna's torch. What frightened me was the truth in it. I was a small man. I had stumbled into a large matter, and large matters do close over small men. I thought of my mother, who was proud that her son wore the red of the household guard. I thought of the border fort and the years and the forgetting. And then I thought of Isolde, a woman I had never met, 3 years dead, who had sat in that cottage adding numbers with a hand that grew weaker month by month, frightened, alone, not knowing whom to trust, doing the slow, patient right thing anyway, and hiding the proof of it in a sealed box against the day a stranger would open it and finish what she could not. She had been a small person too at the end, a queen but small, one dying woman against a household of thieves, and she had not walked away. "My lord," I said, "I have already refused a promotion tonight. I find I have no appetite left for bargaining. I saw what I saw. I will say what I saw. If they break me for it, then they break me, but they will break me telling the truth, and I would rather be a broken, honest man than a whole liar with a queen's murder on my silence." "Good morning, my lord. The door is that way." Cassius looked at me for a long moment with something in his face that might, in another man, have been the beginning of respect, and might only have been the calculation of a new enemy's exact weight. Then he was gone, and Havard let out a breath, and the strong room was safe, and the original ledger, the real one, in the dead queen's real hand, lay under Master Oren's seal, waiting for the king to speak. But the setback had done its work. By noon the palace was split. Half of it whispered that the consort was a murderess, half whispered that the corporal was a forger and the king's sister a schemer, and the very fact of the split was Morwenna's victory, because a truth that half the palace disbelieves is a truth that can be argued, delayed, buried under inquiries and counter-inquiries until everyone is tired and the thing is quietly dropped. She did not need to win. She needed only to muddy the water enough that no one could be made to drink. And she was very, very good at muddying water. The false dawn, the moment it looked as though she might, after everything, walk free, came that afternoon, and it came from a direction none of us had guarded. It came from the ledger itself. Morwenna's people had been busy. They had found or made a flaw. A member of the consort's household, a clerk who had once worked under Master Oren and knew the old man's methods, came forward, before the gathering council, with a grave and troubled face, and testified that the ledger could not be genuine, because on 3 of its pages the late queen had referred to false entries passing through the office of the household steward, as countersigned by the controller of the consort's household. But, said the clerk, the office of controller of the consort's household had not existed in the early months the ledger covered. It had been created later, by the king's own warrant, only 18 months before the queen's death. So a document that named that office in entries dated 2 years before the queen died, said the clerk, could not have been written by the queen at those dates. It must have been written later, written, indeed, by someone who did not know the office's true history, written, in short, by a forger. By me. It was a good stroke. It was a very good stroke, the council murmured. The king's face, which had hardened toward his wife all morning, went uncertain again, because here at last was a hard, checkable, documentary fact against the ledger, and not merely a whisper. And Morwenna, sitting straight-backed and pale and dignified in her place, let a single tear fall and said, in a low, broken voice, that she had been accused of the foulest crime a woman could commit, on the strength of a paper that was now shown to be false, by a sister who hated her and a corporal who had broken into a sealed house, and that she asked only for justice, and for the corporal to be questioned as to who had paid him to forge a dead queen's hand. And for a long, cold moment, in that gathering room, it looked as though she had won. It was Master Oren who broke it, and I have loved that dry, careful, cowardly, brave old man ever since for the way he did it. He did not shout. He did not accuse. He rose from his place with his spectacles in his hand, and asked the king's leave to say one thing about the office of controller. For, he said, he was the keeper of the household records, and if any man alive knew when that office was created and how, it was he, since he had entered the warrant into the record with his own hand. The clerk is correct, said Master Oren, that the office of controller of the consort's household was created by the king's warrant 18 months before the late queen's death. He is correct, and he is clever, and he has counted on all of you knowing that and stopping there. He put on his spectacles and lifted the ledger, which he had brought sealed, and which he now broke open before the whole council, and turned to a particular page. But he has not read the ledger. He has read 3 lines of it chosen to trap you, because if he had read the ledger he would have found here, on the 4th page, the late queen's own note, in her own hand, which I will now read. I have gone back tonight and corrected my earlier entries. When I first noticed the false payments, I did not yet know whose office was passing them, for the man doing it worked then only as an under-steward. It was only later, when he was made controller of the consort's household by the king's warrant, that I understood he had been placed there on purpose, to have the countersigning of the very entries he had been quietly making all along. I have therefore gone back through these pages and named him by the office he now holds, so that whoever reads this after me will know where to look, for the office is where the proof will be, not the year." Master Orin lowered the ledger. The late Queen used the later title deliberately, and said so in writing on the 4th page, so that a reader would look in the right office. It is not the error of a forger. It is the note of an honest bookkeeper correcting herself and explaining the correction. The one thing a forger trying to make an old document would never do, because a forger wants his paper to look untouched, and only an honest hand admits in the margin, "I have gone back and changed this, and here is why." He looked at the clerk. "Your trap, young man, is the proof of the very thing it was set to disprove. Only the true author of these accounts would have left that note. Whoever taught you those 3 lines did not dare let you read the 4th page. Ask yourself why." The room was utterly silent, and the king, who had been given a spar to cling to and had just watched it dissolve in his hands, turned slowly toward his wife. But Master Orin was not finished, and neither, it turned out, was Dr. Wren. The physician rose, gray and shaking, and said that he had done as the Princess Adela commanded, and written down everything he remembered of the late Queen's illness. Every symptom, every refused medicine, every word he had dismissed as wandering, and that when he had written it out plainly, in order, 3 years too late, he had seen what he had been too comfortable and too frightened to see while she lived. That the pattern of her sickness, its coming and going, its wasting, its worsening whenever she took the tonic prepared for her by the consort's own household, and its easing whenever she refused it and would eat only what she prepared herself, that pattern was not a natural illness at all. "She told me someone was making her ill," said Dr. Wren, and his voice broke on it, "and I told her she was wandering and I gave her more of the tonic. God forgive me. She was not wandering. She was the only one adding the numbers, and she added those 2, and she was right." He set his written account before the king with a hand that trembled so hard the pages rattled. "It is late, your majesty. It is 3 years too late. But it is the truth, and I will swear it on anything you name, and I will answer for my part in it as I deserve." And that was the turn, not one grand blow, but 3 plain honest people, one after another, each saying the true thing they had been afraid to say. The corporal who told what he saw, the keeper who read the 4th page, the physician who at last stopped calling murder wandering. Against a queen's whole practiced art of muddying water, they set 3 clear cups of it, and asked the king only to drink. He rose. King Alaric rose from his chair, an old man moving as though every year of his life had come to sit on his shoulders at once, and he looked at Morwenna, his wife of 2 years, who had filled the empty places after Isolde, who had wept a single dignified tear an hour before, and I watched the last of the drowning man hope go out of his eyes and something final and terrible take its place. He did not rage. That was the worst of it and the most kingly. He did not rage. "Morwenna," he said quietly, "there is a note on the 4th page. Explain it to me." She could not. That was the whole of it in the end. She had built her defense on the assumption that no one would read past the 3rd line, and when the 4th page was read she had no answer, and a woman like Morwenna without an answer is a thing I hope never to see again, because for one moment the mask came entirely off, and what was under it was not evil in any grand sense. It was only a vast, cold, frightened greed that had wanted and taken and killed to keep from being caught, and would have gone on and on had a corporal not heard a door. She looked at the king, and she looked at his sister, and she looked, last of all and longest, at me, the small man who had become the hinge, and I saw her understand that she had lost, and that she had lost because on one cold night at 2 in the morning she had met a man who wanted nothing she had to sell. "You should have taken the promotion," she said to me. It was almost gentle. It was the truest thing she ever said to me. "I know, your majesty," I said, "but I couldn't have held the light. My hands were full of the seal." The king ordered it done in the light as he had promised. Not a quiet disappearance, not a discreet retirement to a distant estate, the light. Before the assembled council, and then before the household, and then, because a crown that hides its own crimes rots from the inside. Before the realm, the whole of it was laid open. The false entries traced and totted by Master Orin against Isolde's ledger, and found to match to the coin. The accounts in Morwenna's benefit uncovered and frozen. Cassius's countersignature on entry after entry. The physician's account of a poisoning called wandering. And at the center of all of it, the plain fact that the late Queen Isolde had discovered the whole scheme, had gathered the proof at the cost of her own life, and had hidden it in her sealed home against the day someone would open it, and that the day had come not by any grand design, but because the guilty party, after 3 years of nerve, had at last cracked and gone in the dark to burn the truth, and been caught by the one man on the post who could not be bought. Morwenna was stripped of the style of Queen Consort by the king's own hand and given over to the lawful justice of the realm, to answer for the theft and for the death, and Cassius with her, for the countersigning and the seizure attempt, and the courts of Eldermoor, which I will not pretend moved quickly, moved in the end, and moved in the light, and the whole realm watched them do it. I was called before them, of course. Cassius had promised me I would be broken for becoming the hinge, and I will not say his people did not try. There were questions asked about my past, and a rumor floated of a debt I had never owed, and a woman I had never met was said to have said a thing she never said. But it did not stick, and it did not stick for the simplest of reasons. A truth set down early is a fortress. My account, written kneeling in the dark by a sergeant's lantern within 2 hours of the event, signed and sealed and entered into the record before Morwenna had her boots off, could not be shaken, because it had been fixed before anyone knew which way the wind would blow, and it never once changed, because I had never once had to change it, because it was true. That is the thing I would tell a young guardsman if he asked me, and now and then, being old, I am asked. They think the story is about the night I stood in a sealed room and refused a queen's torch, and they want to know whether I was afraid, and how I found the nerve. But that is not where the story was won. The story was won 2 hours later, kneeling on cold stone, writing down the plain truth before I had any idea whether it would save me or hang me. Courage in the dark is a fine thing and lasts about a minute. What lasts is the boring, unglamorous discipline of setting the truth down early and never needing to move it, of being the kind of man whose account does not change, because he did not act one way and then wish he had acted another. I have come to think that is the whole of honor in the end, not the grand refusal, the quiet consistency underneath it, that a man's yesterday and his today tell the same story without being made to. They restored Wren Cottage after the king ordered it, not sealed again. He could not bear to seal it, having learned what a sealed house can be made to hide, and having learned too that a thing kept in the dark is a thing that can be broken into in the dark. He had it opened and aired, and the dust of 3 years swept out of it, and the shawl folded and the book closed and shelved, and the stopped clock wound and set going again. And then he made of it a small quiet house of records, Isolde's ledger, the true one, kept there under glass, and beside it the copies and the physician's account and Master Orin's tallies, and I was told, though I never went to see it, a fair copy of a certain corporal's report written by lantern light on a cold terrace. Not a shrine, a record, a house where the truth about a good woman would be kept in the light, so that no one would ever again have to break in at 2 in the morning to find it. The king said, when he ordered it, that a queen who had died keeping the books honest deserved a house that kept them honestly forever after, and I have always thought that was exactly right. I saw him once more, near the end of his life. He was very old by then, and I was no longer young, and he sent for me. I had risen by then, through no cleverness of my own, only the slow accumulation of years and a name that people had decided to trust, to sergeant, and then beyond it, further than a man who heard a door open ever expected to go. He was sitting by a window in the light, a blanket over his knees, and he looked at me a long while, and then he said, "Vale, you never did take a promotion out of that night, did you?" "Not really. You let the years give it to you slowly instead." "I couldn't have taken it from her hand, your majesty," I said. It would have been the wrong weight. He smiled at that, a tired, kind old smile, and he nodded as though I had confirmed something he had long believed. Isolde would have liked you, he said. She kept the books honest and it cost her everything and no one thanked her for it while she lived. You kept the door honest for one night and it cost you a good deal and no one thanked you either, not really, not enough. I never thanked you enough. He put out his old hand and I took it and it was very light. Thank you, Sergeant, for hearing the door, for not holding the light, for writing it down true before you knew if it would save you. A kingdom is only ever as strong as the smallest man in it who cannot be bought, and on one cold night that was you, and I have not forgotten it, and now I have said it, and I can go easier for having said it. Go back to your post. So I went back to my post. That is, in the end, what we do, the ones who wear the red and stand the watch. We go back to our posts. The great matters rise up and roar and pass. The queens fall and the kings grieve and the courts sit and the realm watches. And when it is all over, the guardsman folds his account and squares his shoulders and goes back to standing in the cold in front of a door, watching a quiet thing not change, keeping a promise that no one is looking at him keep. I still walk past Wren Cottage sometimes, of a winter night. Out of an old habit the body does not lose. There is a light in it now, a small steady lamp they leave burning in the room of records so that the house is never dark again. And every time I see that light I think of a woman I never met, adding numbers alone with a hand that grew weaker, hiding the truth in a box against the day a stranger would open it, and of the promise the king's sister kept for her, sealed and untouched, and of one door in the dark that gave with a sound I knew like a wrong note in an old song. And I think, it held, all of it held. The seal held long enough, and the truth held longer, and in the end the smallest thing held the largest, a corporal who wanted nothing, standing between a frightened queen and the fire she had come to build. The door was sealed for 3 years and does not simply open. It resists, but when at last it opened into the light. And that, I have come to believe, is the only way worth opening anything at all.